What is up, Mets fans? Welcome back to another episode of the Mets'd podcast. Recurring guest, Lance Brozdowski, joining us to talk about not just Mets pitching in general, but also some Mets pitching prospects. We got a bunch of names that we're going to go through in today's episode. We hope you guys are excited to listen and watch. Remember, if you're over on YouTube, subscribe to the Mets'd podcast YouTube channel. Go subscribe to Lance's channel as well, approaching 10,000 subscribers. We need to get him over there if you want pitching content. There's nobody better on the internet right now, especially on YouTube. So make sure you are subscribed. There'll be a link in the description. And let's get going into this. So the Mets have made a lot of moves. I guess we could start with the guys on the major league roster right now, and then we'll get a little bit deeper into those prospects. But one of the big names that people are most interested in talking about this offseason has been Clay Holmes, because the Mets are going to be attempting to turn him into a starting pitcher. Would love to hear your thoughts about that idea and whether you think he actually can maybe stick there.
I thought you were going to say Griffin Canning. I mean, come on, he's not excited about Griffin Canning. I think that this was an interesting conversion candidate. I made a video a bit ago about Holmes and Hoffman specifically, just because those were the obvious rumor guys that I thought had a shot at it. I think when you approach it from a data perspective, you're basically looking at, does this guy have some semblance of command relative to starters in Major League Baseball that could hold up, and how deep is the mix? I think the hesitancy that a lot of people had with Holmes specifically was that he's a sinker guy. Sinkers usually work versus same-handed hitters, don't often work as well versus oppo-handed hitters. So a lot of people, I think, were hesitant to assume that this guy would be able to throw 140 innings and post, sub 40 ERA as a starter. But there's like a quirk of that oppo-handed sinker thing that you get to if you're like a Logan Webb style, where if you have enough like drop on your sinker, it'll actually work to the opposite handedness. Now, Holmes doesn't have drop, but he's such a weird release guy because of how high he releases the ball, that I think he has the perception of drop to get him to allow 30-40% of that sinker to left-handed hitters and not have a massive issue. I think he's going to use the four seam more. We'll see if they add in some other funky pitch, develop the changeup to help against lefties. But I think I'm cautiously optimistic. I don't think he's like starting a playoff game for the Mets, but I think that he's a good starter for, I don't know, 20 starts, 25, and then maybe they convert him back to the pen, and he looks great in the postseason. I've always been a Holmes fan, I would say. I don't think I ever really understood much of the hate coming from the Yankee fans about him. I guess I kind of understand because he blew some saves here and there, and he never was like a lockdown Class A style closer, but he's not that kind of pitcher. So I like this. They got to go for some upside. They spent so much money on Soto. You got to kind of piece together and have fun with the rotation. I think Holmes fits.
Lance, to give you a lot of credit, because you were one of the first people, I feel like, who was banging this drum for Clay Holmes to wind up as a starting pitcher this offseason. You mentioned the fact that maybe he does something funky like a changeup. What about Clay Holmes's approach, his arm angle, anything about him that makes you think a changeup is possible? And if any reason, why hasn't that been something he's been able to develop so far?
I don't know if it was like totally necessary as a reliever. I feel like a reliever a lot of times, I think some teams like the Twins are starting to push into deeper mixes for relievers. You see this with like a Griffin Jacks, who's another guy who's, I don't think is going to convert this offseason to a starter, but has been speculated in that realm of like, okay, who's got command and a deep mix and can battle both handedness that maybe has the workload we could push up to get to 120 innings, because that's obviously where there's more value from a, value over replacement perspective from a pitcher perspective. But yeah, I think that we've gotten to the point with seam orientation understanding, which you could bucket into this giant glob of like seam shifted wake, seam effect stuff, that basically most guys can get to some decent kind of changeup, even if it's just like a chase changeup that has a bunch of vert that drops off a fastball. Obviously, like the best changeups in baseball are from guys who've thrown them for a long time and can command them and etc. But I just think if you're looking for something more arm side drop for swing and miss that isn't a sinker to opposite handed hitters, because lefties is probably going to be more of his problem, then that's like an obvious route to go. I actually don't have too much experience like hands on. I'm trying to get more polished with understanding what orientations to go to, whether to go change up or split, and some of those characteristics. It's probably better to ask like someone who's actually hands on with athletes all the time. But I definitely have talked to people who are like, yeah, I could get most guys to throw some kind of changeup now, even if it's just a 2-strike chase pitch. And I think that could be valuable for a guy like Holmes.
Now, for a guy like Griffin Canning, a lot of Mets fans are not particularly excited that they signed him.
Come on, I'm excited about Canning.
Okay, yeah, so there it is, because statistically last year was one of the worst pitchers in baseball, if not the worst.
He's terrible.
Yeah, he was horrible. But we also know he's coming from the Angels organization, which has had a really hard time developing pitching. Even like their first-round picks over the last year with Reed Detmers and Sam Bachman, guys just haven't really lived up to the hype. So what is making you excited about Griffin Canning that can maybe give the Mets fans at home a little bit of like a deep breath of like, okay, this isn't insane?
Well, one of my favorite things to do every offseason is to look at the prior year's worst pitchers. I have this theory that I've talked to major league coaches and minor league coaches about, that terrible pitchers are better to work with from like a let's get better standpoint than guys who are like mediocre average, where the guy who's mediocre average maybe doesn't think he needs to do a lot to sustain his job, when in reality the league adjusts back and then he's really bad. But and that's honestly the case of Canning probably between like 21, 22, and 23,
Yeah.
where he was like, I'm okay. And then the league was like, you are bad. And he was like, I am bad. Need to adjust now. So I love those guys. I actually have a video coming out today on my YouTube channel that is in this idea of let's look at the worst pitchers in baseball and try to pick out some that have some improvements. I cheated a little. I have like Justin Verlander in there going to the Giants, but Griffin Canning's on that list. So I talk about him a bit. The key thing with him is, one, I don't think the Angels are particularly good on the pitching side. So I like looking at, the Angels and Marlins. Marlins just turned over a bunch of pitching staff, but like the guys who were on the Marlins this last couple of years, when you are trying to target a guy that is bad, has bad peripherals, maybe has like one decent pitch or two decent pitches, but you can't see a path to success. I like looking at teams where they just turned over staff. So that's where I go like to the Marlins and some of those guys. But with the Angels, it's the same idea. They're not particularly great from the pitching side. So when they go to a sharper org, I think the Mets are on the up and up on the pitching side. I just think they're going to make smart changes. The obvious thing for Canning was on the last game of the season. If you look at his slider, he started throwing a sweeper, and it's a really good sweeper. And he didn't throw him the majority of his career. And the Mets are definitely pro sweeper from some of the minor league names we'll talk about. They have a lot of these guys that rip nasty sweepers that are going to grade out well in stuff models, which is because they're hard A and B sweep a lot and they're going to crush righties. And his was strong. Like some guys break out sweepers and it's like, all right, that's an average sweeper. And we're running into the situation where a lot of average sweepers are just kind of aren't as valuable, I would say. We've seen some deterioration in terms of chase against them in the aggregate when you look from 21, 22 until now, 24-ish. But when you have a good sweeper, like Canning's was like 85 to 87 with a little bit under 12 inches of horizontal, but that's like, it's going to grade out as a plus sweeper. So I like that pitch. I think they're going to rip that a ton. I'll spoil some of my video and say my crazy hot take on him, because I don't think he's going to start a ton. Or I kind of was like, okay, if he starts, I see a path because he's got a couple decent breaking balls. But I kind of love him as this reliever that never throws his fastball. And I'm not talking like cut fastball uses. I'm saying like stop throwing
Like
it
Jacob
and
Junis?
become a four pitch. Exactly.
Yeah.
Become
Rivera.
like a give me this slider tweener pitch that he throws, which he actually commands better than his fastball. That's your strike pitch, early count. And then you go sweeper, curveball, change off that. And you could crush either head into the hitter. And you become just like this matchup proof bullpen demon type guy that maybe gets you to 90 innings if he needs to spot start occasionally, unless they call up like a Sproat or someone along those lines. But I'm kind of in on Canning. I don't know. I get kind of like excited about these terrible pitchers because when you hit a call on one of these guys where it's like, oh, that guy posted a 4 after having like a 5.5, it's like I was on it.
Well, the Mets kind of did.
You're going for everyone else. That's fun.
Yeah.
You can run. Like I've seen these sleepers like Ryan Pepio. It's like Pepio's a fantastic pitcher. Like what is sleepy about Griffin Canning? Is a sleeper. That is a sleeper because everyone is asleep on him, and I can imagine a small step forward that would make him relevant.
I mean, even if you look at it again, like last year, Severino and Minaya, like we're coming off of horrendous years. They were some of the worst pitchers, and the Mets were able to turn them around. Yeah.
It's a great point. Severino got paid. No, it's a great point. I think you get cases of this every year. And that was my point. Like the first time that it made me think of this was going back to like 2018 to 19 with Corbin Burns. And then I believe that prior season was Giolito from 18 to 19 or 17 to 18. I'm mixing up the years where he was like literally the worst pitcher in baseball. And then he put up a 5-WAR season and got Cy votes. Same thing happened with Corbin Burns. Like this happens more than people think. And obviously it's not like 10 of 10. It's more like 1 of 10. But when you hit that 1 of 10, it's very relevant to make that change.
And something else that's cool about Canning is that, yeah, he was the worst pitcher in baseball. The whole reason he was able to become the worst pitcher in baseball statistically was that for the first time in his career, he threw more than 130 innings. He was healthy for the first time ever. So Griffin Canning's in a normal offseason. He's going to work with the Mets. You mentioned the fact that you feel like now the Mets are on the up and up pitching development. Can you tell us why you think that is from an outside perspective? From the inside, we're fully drinking the Kool-Aid. We're all in the Mets pitching lab. Hefner, Yeagers. I also wanted you maybe, if you can, touch on the new hire, Desi Druschel from the Yankees, as we steal all the best guys from the Yankees. But what from the outside makes you think the Mets pitching is on the up and up?
I mean, it's just a matter of looking at some of the stuff in the minor leagues and looking at the pitchers. Honestly, like a good way to do it is literally the exercise that I did before hopping on this pod of looking at like the top 6-7 arms and just seeing what they're building. It's a lot of high velo. It's a lot of 2-plane fastballs. It's a lot of deep mixes, which I really, really like. From young pitchers, I did a video on that as well, and just like expanding repertoire early, allowing you to become a higher probability starting pitcher long term. But I just think they're making sharp decisions from a velocity perspective, a stuff perspective, et cetera. It could just come down to as simple as stuff. And I'm biased as well. Like when you hire people that I've had communication with, like a Jaegers and a Desi, and have had conversations with, and they're good people and they're sharp and they've taught me something, like I'm definitely going to lean in that direction. So maybe it's a little more anecdotal, but I think there's signal in the fact that Desi made a lateral move to go to the Mets, Like that is a little bit surprising. A lot of the times what happens in this stuff is like these lateral moves get blocked from an interviewing perspective. So what the team has to do is then, just straight offer the guy without talking to him, I don't know if this happened with Desi. I know it happened with a couple other like assistant pitching coach kind of swaps this season. And that was a surprising one to me because like Yankees is a great spot. He had a lot of autonomy. I definitely know that he helped out with a lot of their like non-spin tools, which goes back to this like seam shifted wake thing that a lot of teams are on and understanding. I think the Mets are very literate in that sense of being able to get guys to different shapes to help versus different handedness. They push velo, and I'm in on just a lot of the arms that they have in the minors, and I think it's reflected in the prospect lists.
Hey, Valentine's Day is coming up, and we have the recommendation for you to check out right now. Don't wait. It's 1-800-Flowers.com. This year, we're partnering with 1-800-Flowers to make sure you're a Valentine's legend with an exclusive offer for the FT fam. It's double the roses for free. When you buy 1 dozen, they're going to double your bouquet to 2 dozen roses. It's the perfect way to wow her without breaking the bank. 1-800-Flowers always delivers. Let them dominate this holiday. It's what they do best.
Think about everyone in your fam that deserves some love on Valentine's Day. I sent a bouquet to my daughter at college, and it lit up her day. I also added an awesome vase to the order for her, so she's got it all.
All roses from 1-800-Flowers are picked at their peak, cared for every step of the way, and shipped fresh to ensure lasting beauty. Don't wait. Think ahead this year. Make it easy and get that deal right now. When you order 1 dozen, they'll double the rose bouquet for free. That's the FT deals that we're always looking out for. Go to 1-800-Flowers.com/FT. That's 1-800-Flowers.com/FT.
All right, so let's talk about some of those arms now.
Yeah.
We got Brandon Sproat. That's the big one. That's the one everybody's waiting for. A lot of hype around him. How do you feel about Brandon Sproat as a pitching prospect?
Yeah, I'd say I was like, honestly, first off, I thought his name was Sprout for like a year and a half. So I'm glad that I now know it's Sprout, so I don't look like an idiot saying Sprout. But yeah, he pounds the zone. I'm a little more skeptical on the fastball shape here, I think, than other people. I know Eric Longenhagen in Baseball Prospectus just released their top 101. I think he was top 50-ish, right around there, like
Top 40-ish.
top couple, like top 5 pitching prospect in baseball. For me, I don't think he's templated as like a top 5 pitching prospect in baseball. I view him a little bit more, almost more like Brandon Pfaadt from the D-backs, where it's like really pound zone. You look at his maps, everything is centered, and it's worked for a pretty good amount of time because his stuff's really good. It's hard, but the fastball in particular, I'm a little bit hesitant on in terms of some of the shape progression we saw when he jumped up to AAA. It's not a good carry pitch, as we'll talk. Like Jonah Tong just has a really fun fastball. He's trying to get you to other weapons in his mix, which are the slider, the sweeper off that, the changeup, etc. Like that is his goal. This is the goal with a lot of these guys that don't have like great fastball. So while he's been able to kind of just rip that thing by AA and lower than that hitters, I am not like totally sold in this guy being like a top rotation type. I like him more as like a horse middle, which is where I think like the Pfaadt comp makes sense, because I don't think a lot of people view him as like an ace. He was terrible his first year too, and then he bounced back pretty nice last year. I think people are probably in the middle on him. Like, he's a valuable starting pitcher. He's under control. People like him, but they don't view him as like a top rotation type. I think that's where I come down on Sproat. I know other people have different opinions here. And if you're ranking him on the top 40, top 5 pitching prospect in baseball purely because he's stable, I get that. Like, I totally understand that. Like, pitching prospects are really volatile. I think I lean more towards like the guys like the Noah Schultzes of the world, some of these guys where it's like you get unique outlier traits alongside that velo and better shapes than a Sproat from a fastball perspective specifically. And then it's like, okay, I'll buy into that. Whereas like Sproat, I view more as like gonna have a major league role and make impact, but is this guy like starting game 1 of the Mets CS or World Series run in 2027? No. But is he pitching game 3 and does he give you 5 innings, 6 innings, and it's good? Like, yeah, I'm cool with that. So I guess I just temper my expectations a little bit more, where I think he's like a major leaguer. I'm just not totally sold in this fastball working long-term to make him like an elite starting pitcher.
Where do you have the seesaw between velocity on a fastball and shape on a fastball? Because one of the things that holds back Pfaadt specifically is that fastball is a lot more cut than ride. It doesn't have much ride at all. He doesn't really often get it to the 95 range. He never really touches 96 range. Whereas Sproat, At times,
Yes.
his minor league career has been able to sit there. So, and again, I don't think he'll be able to sit there forever. But where do you have the value between shape and velocity for a pitcher like Sproat?
It's a great point. I introspect about this a lot when I look at things because, like, one of the things that I know, like Robert Stock, I believe he's a former Met, right? Former Cub too. Now he's with the Red Sox, and like I remember him and Kyle Bodie at Driveline had a conversation on Twitter about how, as you throw harder, there's like some biomechanical element that literally like prevents you from creating great shape. So it's like this is why you look at a lot of like really hard fastballs in baseball, and you're like, the shape's not that good. You know, it's like it's kind of two plane, doesn't have above average vert relative to the slot. It runs a little, so to work versus righties. He needs a sinker, etc. You know, like this is almost like to some extent the Paul Skeens problem when he was coming out of college. Everyone was like, bad fastball, and it's like, yeah, but like velocity can buffer against bad fastball shape. So your point on fought to Sproat is a good one in terms of like, okay, I had 3 ticks there. I'm much more confident in that fastball working. I think the thing that I would prefer to see is like, I definitely want velo first. If you're telling me like balance the scale out, I'll take velo. But it's like it's a sliding scale. It's like how bad is the shape? You know, is it like I Max Meyer's a good example, right? Minnesota kid had a banger slider his entire career at Minnesota, and then he jumps at the majors, gets crushed. You know, and it's like, okay, that guy's got a bad fastball. Like he cuts it a bit, it's not cutting enough. He just throws it over the middle of the plate, and he throws 93, 94. It's like give that guy 3 ticks, and like maybe we could get that shape a little better. So I lean towards the velocity side, but I think what we run into is like, we're seeing a lot at the major league level. Guys are zoning on fastballs so much as hitters and crushing them that you almost have to like make the shape slightly better to throw harder and then throw the pitch less. And it becomes a matter of like situationally, how are you using that fastball to get the most life out of it, so to speak. So I unfortunately don't have his usage up right here, but I think he was throwing around like 45 to 50%. He was pretty fastball heavy in the minors, I believe. And I think that's got to come down. It's just like the nature of the beast. Like you can zone that thing and get it by AA hitters, but the velo's good. But because the shape is more average to me, I think it's going to grade out probably above average in stuff models. But I wouldn't be surprised if that pitch slightly underperforms. Again, I view him more as a guy that is like trying to punch you to everything that is deep in his mix. So we're going to maybe run into some problems where he's like worse behind in count than the average pitcher in baseball because like maybe he tries to go back to the fastball and it's like 96 flattish shape, even though it's arm side, that's going to get crushed by lefties.
I mean, that would make sense too. He did struggle at AAA, and you are just going to get a different quality of hitter at that level rather than AA, where that velo could really just be the riding force there. Another guy in the Mets org that's really got some helium right now, Jonah Tong.
This guy's so much helium.
He's such a like interesting prospect because he kind of came out of like everyone knew this could be something that was happening, but his rise last year was meteoric in terms of as a pitching prospect, where now there's some lists that have him inside the top 100 prospects, and he was someone who was relatively unknown. What is it about Jonah Tong that makes him so enticing as a prospect?
Yeah, the fastball shape's great here. And that is really it. It's a tough one. I feel like, I don't know, I'll admit, in this industry, like I'll build my list preseason. I'll do an update in season in terms of my like top pitching prospects. I throw it up on my Substack. I pull in some advanced data and stuff. And a lot of the time, like when I miss somebody like a Tom or even Sproat, I don't think I ranked Sproat last year. And then this year I was like, oh man, I can't believe I missed this guy. I tend to like become a little overly critical of them to try to like defend my list. So like, I think I'm slightly down on Sproat relative to the market on my list. And Tong, I didn't rank in my top 40, which I will now correct in this coming season. But I was like a little bit off him because what we were running into it early last year and mid last year when he started to ascend is that Tong reminds me so much of like a Taj Bradley, where it's a huge carry fastball. One of the problems with guys, this is like the blight of stuff models. Stuff models love this pitch. Like this is going to be a plus fastball. It's probably going to grade like one of the top 10-ish, 15 if he holds his shape as he ascends and uses major league ball, which is a quirk I won't get into, but minor league ball slightly different than the ball used at AAA in the majors. So like you get some shape regression. So he's popping 20 inches of vert from a 6-foot release at 93-ish right now. Like if that comes down to 19, 18 and a half, I won't be totally surprised. It's just a byproduct of how the lower level balls are just different than the major league balls. It's really annoying from a data perspective when you're building models because it's like, it doesn't happen to Sproat because Sproat was like, I think 15 and 10, 15 and 11 in AA or below. So that's 15 inches of vert and 11 arm side. It's about average vert, but more arm side than your average fastball. He gets up to AAA, small sample, he's down to like 14 and 10. And like, that's objectively worse shape. So it's like, if I'm looking at him in AA and going, I have to like think, okay, is he going to hold this 16 and 10 shape as he gets to the majors? If not, then like, I don't necessarily think it's going to work, you know? So that's why I don't mean to rip BP. I love a lot of their work, but They ranked a lot of guys aggressively that are low, like Travis Sikora and Jackson Ferris, who are lower level pitchers who I think have okay stuff, but have great results. And I was wondering whether these guys start to maybe slightly regress as they jump up and use major league balls and stuff. So that's why, like, I want the guys with really good movement. So going back to Tong, to some extent, I think I buy that, like, even with some regression on his forcing, this guy's still going to have a great fastball. The problem, and I'm going in a giant circle here, so hang with me. The problem with really good fastball shape like this is that when you're behind the ball really well and you create this carry, you're generally limited in what other pitches you can compile and turn and like create. This was Taj Bradley's problem for a while because his slider has been all over the place the last couple of years. They finally got into like a weird split change thing that's working. But Tong, to me, slider and changeup just are kind of fine. Because he's so behind the ball, like you just Google like a YouTube highlight or whatever of him. He like tilts, he almost reminds me a little bit like Lincecum, but his arm is like up. And because he's a little shorter, he's got good extension, he pulls that down to a reasonable release height such that he's carrying this ball from such a low slide, it works. But I struggle a little bit to envision like the current Tong, the mix he has is not going to be the mix he has when he's a major leaguer. There's going to be some tweaks on the slider. There's going to be some tweaks on the changeup. I think the curveball's fine, but it pops way too much off the fastball line. Like, I just think it's really rare for a guy to be like, I'm fastball curveball in the majors. It's like, I think hitters mostly can ID that and figure that out of hand, unless you're like Adam Wainwright or something. So I just think you're not in like final form Tong yet. But again, the basis of the fastball shape here, literally at best pitch in this organization, it's probably the Tong fastball. So I get why everyone's excited about him. I guess in my devil's advocate window, I'm just like, I've seen this before with some guys where it's like great fastball, and then it's like it takes this guy 2 to 3 years to figure out a slider and a changeup, and he has heavy platoon splits in one direction because one of those pitches comes before the other. So I'm going to rank, if I had to like rank it, obviously I think most people have Sproat 1, so I'll go Sproat 1 in terms of pitcher in the system, and I'll go Tong 2 purely on the fastball. But they're very different pitchers to me. Like Sproat is like, I'm going to get you away from the fastball and pound you in the zone. And Tong is like a little weary on the command. And I think a lot of success is literally just from guys being like, I don't know what the heck that was. Like, I don't see 20 vert at 94 from a 6 release much. So like, I'm just going to swing at it and it's over my bad. I'm screwed, you know? So they're very different pitchers is all I'll say. And it's funny because like most of the guys in this org with the Mets kind of look like Sproat, where it's like two planey fastball and a big mix off that in velo, where Tong is like very different. Tong is like almost like a Rays pitcher to some extent, where it's like vert fastball and slider. So I went on a huge rant there, but
No,
he's
it's great.
fascinating to me, partially because like I just think there's going to be like bumps in the road along the way. The guy's not just going to come up and be like the thing of things, unless we find out he's got a new split grip or something. But like, I'm convinced there's going to be some development here that's like, oh, I changed this, and now all of a sudden I got like really good vert on my change, and it works versus lefties, and that was my problem the whole time. So, but I'm following him closely for sure.
Mets fans are going to be so mad. They're going to be so mad you're saying all this.
It doesn't make sense if I just come on here and go like,
No,
this
I
guy's
know.
the best.
No.
We don't want
Like,
that.
no,
We don't
let me
want
give you the
that.
warts.
Yeah, we
You're
don't
If
here
you're comfortable
for the
with
rants.
warts, then you're even more in on the guy. Yeah,
This is what we want, the honesty, the truth. And something with a guy like Tong, I have another seesaw question for you.
Mhm.
He is such an extreme case in terms of his arm action, his release, and his fastball.
Yeah.
Is there a world where you give some of that back so you can build more things off of a first particular pitch, or is it so good and so special that you just don't disrupt it? I've heard I've heard Kyle Harrison, I want to say, talk about this, that it's been very hard for him to build pitches because he's another guy who has such a high arm slot and a high vert, high hoppy fastball.
Yeah.
Is it beneficial in any way
question.
to move that or no?
I don't think I'd move his. It's a great question though. I feel like I remember watching a talk from Brian Bannister, who's now in the pitching department with the White Sox, and he talked about how like most guys he's coached that he's had like big breakthroughs with, like a Logan Webb and such, even like an Eric Fetty. I don't believe worked with Bannister, maybe worked with Bannister specifically, but at least worked in a similar mold to Webb. Most of these guys like lower slots. You know, like lowering the slot just gets the guy more comfortable. It stays in play and rotation better. You know, the fastball might regress a little bit, but it allows them to open up. Like, you know, we'll flip this changeup group, get you more depth, and then you got a nasty sweeper. Now, this is the Eric Fetty model, essentially. With Tong, he's so vertical that like I don't think you can drop him. You know, it's like you're dropping him from here to like here. This would be like Robert Stock. Like I'm bringing up Robert Stock 2 times in the podcast. Who had that on the bingo card? But he posted a video the other day where he like showed he was more vert, and now he's like pure sidearm, and he's throwing like these demon sinkers at 96 and stuff. And like that's a massive change. You know, I just don't think you drop Tong's slot because of how good the fastball is. I think the outcomes for him are like, you become there's another guy I'm going to comp to like Pete Fairbanks in here, but you could become kind of like a Pete Fairbanksy reliever where it's like you push the velo higher for him. He sits maybe 95, 96, and it's just like Robert Suarez is a good one, maybe. It's like such a good fast break throw. I think 70% of the time he's a good reliever. But there's going to be more like the reliever risk on a lot of these guys. Like for like first three here, Sproat, Tong, and Tidwell. Like the reliever risk for Tong is the highest in my opinion. But he's gonna be a good reliever. So it's one of those things. Like, do you want? Is it Tidwell? I hope it's Tidwell.
Yeah,
I don't
Tidwell.
know if it's Tidwell.
Yeah, Tidwell.
Tidwell. Tidwell is like a 5 who like's kind of boring. I don't mean to like poo-poo him. He's just like
fine.
it is what it is. Like he's a organizational starter to me. And he's in this like Savali Michaelis type mold where it's like that's your awesome outcome is to get him to that. But he's a little more generic on the fastball release because he's higher up. So like I think that guy starts. I don't think that guy would be as strong as a reliever in my opinion. So he's probably like a 5 org starter, 4-5. Tong is like the upside of a 3-2 with like a leverage reliever, and then Sproat is like your locked in 3-ish type in my opinion. So there's like very different gradations on some of these guys in the Mets org.
What do you think about Nolan McLean? Because he's another like weird guy
He's
where
like
we saw him in the spring breakout game, and me and James were like, "Whoa!" Like the numbers were gaudy, the spin rates were crazy, and this for a guy who still has not had a full season just being a pitcher only. This upcoming year will be the first time he does it. What can Mets fans look for with a guy like Nolan McLean?
He's got a ton of spin. He's got like 3,000 RPM plus on a sweeper, which is just great. And I think that that's what you lean into. I had a director of pitching in another organization tell me like, if your guy's strength is throwing like high spin, hard breaking balls, then you should be throwing like 3 to 4 different kinds of those breaking balls and throwing them as much as possible. And I think that makes a lot of sense for a guy like him. But I also like the fact, again, to the point of liking the Mets org, like they've diversified the mix on a lot of these guys. There's a lot of guys that like A-ball below that, like throwing changeups and mixing in like second sliders. Like they're kind of doing what we're seeing at the major league level in terms of like everyone adding a tweener slider where it's like the Clay Holmes, like exactly. Like he had this weird tweener slider, started throwing a sweeper, became really good. And then he kind of added back this, in terms of usage, this like depth tweener slider. But most of the time it's tagged as a cutter. You watch it, it's probably a cutter, but to me it has so much drop, it's more a slider. So I like that they've really expanded McLean's mix in that respect. I struggle sometimes with these guys that just don't have a lot of reps because I think if I was in like a front office or something, I'd probably lean more on my scouts for guys like that. Or it's like, where do you see his body going over time? Where's the makeup in terms of his like adaptability? He's not pitched for a while. So like I see the potential for like an awesome upswing and he's got the raw tools for it. But I'm not great at, I would say, I'll admit, I'm just not great at projecting these guys who don't have like a ton of innings under their belt. Robbie Snelling's another one that comes to mind who got traded from the Padres to the Marlins to go in the pitching prospect bucket here. But he's another one where it's like, kind of fun lefty, doesn't really throw hard, nothing shape-wise looks great, but it's like everyone's just like, he's young and he's athletic. And it's like, okay, like, I don't know how much that matters, but at least with McLean, I think the positive of McLean is like, it's a deep mix already. I know there's not a ton of strikes there, but like the breakers look great. The worst outcome for him is like, he's like some power reliever, which is like a banger sweeper. Yeah. And maybe he's like almost like a Clay Holmesy type guy where it's like, you just rip that sweeper, he becomes like a decent righty killer in the pen. And then, I don't know, maybe he flips into a starting role. Because again, the mix is deep enough where I like the idea of all these Mets guys just like pushing as starters for as long as possible. And then whatever happens down the road happens down the road. You know, if Cohen wants to go out and buy 2 other starters, then you have these excess. And as you've seen with the Dodgers, like, I don't think that's an issue at all.
No.
Like, that Dodgers team is terrifying from a matchup standpoint if you get into the playoffs of, like, who are they going to start? Like, I don't know. Let's just look at your lineup and see who you suck most against. That's where we're going to start, you know? Like.
Yeah, McLean with that sweeper always has reminded me a little bit of Matt Brash, but, like, if he put on 40 pounds and grew a beard and, like, grew out long, like, rock star hair, like, because that's just, it becomes, like, that good of a pitch. I feel like the pitch like that is, like, what can carry you. But we spent a lot of time now talking about this top tier of Mets pitching prospects. I'm going to get a little deeper now. I want to specifically talk about last year's Mets draft class because they drafted a ton of pitchers and a ton of pitchers out of college in the mid rounds. We know the draft is your specialty. You were on MLB Network last year covering it, and the Mets second round pick was someone who
Breaking news, Jesse Winker back to the Mets.
What?
Jesse Winker back to the Mets. Breaking news on the podcast live.
Wow. That's
there
amazing.
We go. All right, good stuff.
Okay. Do we like that? I got to interview you guys now. Is that a good? I haven't been on the Winker market too much.
I'm happy for it, and it really does just put a little more pressure on Pete Alonso, which I love. I love squeezing them for everything he's got right now.
It's gonna be so funny when this comes out in like a week and a half, and we're like, "Oh, breaking news!"
Jesse Winker.
That's awesome. But some guy I remember seeing you get like visibly excited about on television was Duke's pitcher Jonathan Santucci. The Mets took in the second round.
Santucci's fun.
Yeah. So tell us what you like about Santucci and just what do you think about him as a pitcher.
So like I wouldn't say the draft is my expertise, so to speak. I will admit that like I was actually a little surprised when they asked me to do the draft because like I don't have a ton of draft experience. So I spent like a ton of time learning everything about college baseball over the course of like 3 months when I got told I was going to do this because I was like, man, the last thing I want is like going on air and saying something really dumb about an organization and stuff, or like not knowing conferences, et cetera, et cetera. So I definitely like polished up. I thought I got to a reasonable level, and also into this realized that like my strength is just analyzing pitching. And I talked to enough people in different orgs about this stuff, but also ran into issues with the ball in college and like park adjustments and all these things, and like asking different orgs about like what their shape was in this guy's fastball. And they're like, yeah, we don't have that shape at all. We have this, and it's like, oh my god. And at the end of the day, everyone was like, just look for like spin capacity and weird release characteristics and results. And I was like, that's like the most boring stuff ever. Like I'm locked on all this weird shape stuff all the time in the minors, and you're telling me just to like look for 2800 RPM sliders that are getting swing miss. It's like that seems easy, but anyways, that's oversimplification. But Santucci was a well-regarded prospect for a period of time. Kind of had a down year last year, couldn't find his own, strike problems, etc. End of the year, I think either he made a mechanical adjustment or moved on the rubber. I'm mixing up which of those it was, but he did something differently. And in his final like couple starts, there was like flashes of like 2022 threes command that made him more relevant of a pitching prospect. And instead, he was kind of at where he was at, and he fell really hard in the draft. I think he's interesting because I really like the slider here. This thing is like kind of invisible. It's really platoon neutral. Worked versus lefties and righties for him in college at Duke. He just really he didn't perform well. So like there was no way people were going to juice him up in the draft. Like Durangelo Saintja and Trey Savage threw so well, Chase Burns, all these other guys, that like there was no way Santucci was going to be able to eclipse any of those guys. But entering last college baseball season, like there was more talk of Santucci than there was of some of these other guys. Maybe not Chase Burns, etc., but like he was up there with those. He just didn't perform to the point where people were sold on him. And this is where he runs an interesting thing on the pitching development side, where it's like, okay, like this guy wasn't great, but like we see these subtle adjustments here. Like let's get him back to 23. You know, we have some track record of success, but he just didn't have it right now. So like, how confident are we getting back to that point? And for him, it's really the slider. Like I had from a shape comp, I don't go like pure results, who's going to be comp. I go more like, what is he throwing? What does it look like? Reminds me of like Andrew Heaney. And specifically when he was with the Dodgers, in terms of this bullet lefty slider, not big sweep that works really well. It was kind of like invisible down into righties and also worked versus lefties. Santucci's slider reminds me from a shape perspective a lot of that pitch. It's not super hard. So I don't think like stuff models are going to love this thing, but like he's had results on this thing for so long that I struggle to see how it's not going to be successful in the majors. I'm unsure on roll here. There's obviously some upside. If they could get him in zone more, we'll see. Like who the guy I'm thinking of? George Clausen, traded from the Phillies to the Angels. This dude has like one of the more fun sliders in minor league baseball. But you go back, like Jim Callis is a good friend for MLB Pipeline, and that dude at the combine, he threw a combine pen in 23, I want to say it was. Just literally looked like he was a 14-year-old high school kid who couldn't find the zone. And like he legitimately was so bad. And then like last year, it was like, who is that? Like, he's finding the zone, and it's like he's not walking anybody. So like these things can turn really quickly. So I don't mind the Mets bet here that like the slider is really good. The fastball isn't terrible. He sits 94. You know, we'll see if they get to kick up velo or they just move towards another kind of pitch or something. But I just think the slider is good enough, and they're taking a gamble that they could play around with something command-wise to get him in zone. So yeah, I like him. I think he was a good pick at the value they got him at for sure.
Talking about a velo guy, got to bring up our boy Ryan Lambert. Had him on the pod earlier in the year. Just a crazy human on and off the field. Guy ate 100 eggs. He raw eggs. He just was drinking them. It's insane what he was going through. But the fun thing about him is he throws 101 miles an hour. He throws absolute gas, and we know from talking with him that the Mets are really getting creative with him on the development side. They're doing a lot of the similar stuff that Paul Skeens has been doing. They're trying to get him to learn a splinker. Like, there's a lot of things going on there. So what do you think about Ryan Lambert? Is there anything you got?
Yeah, I'll admit. So his agent is this guy, Mike Zimmerman, who it sounds like you know, Mark. And I met at the combine. Great dude. Like, just enjoy chatting baseball with him. It's really tapped in. He had Lambert. And I'll call him Mike. Sometimes you get agents, and Mike didn't do it specifically, but they'll like pump you guys, and it's like, he's probably like 5 to 10 round. I'm not entirely sure. It's like, man, I'm in the first 2 rounds of the draft. Like, if this guy doesn't have a shot to go 2, then like I'm not going to prep on him too much. But he told me about Lambert, and the thing that, like, sometimes we'll send you like individual TrackMan pitches. People do this all the time, and it's like, look at that thing, and it's like, okay, controlled environment, not a Major League Baseball. That's why he's 94 with 25 inches of vertical break. No one in baseball is going to throw 25 inches of vertical break. But Lambert, the things he sent me were a little more interesting because he was like 97 plus, and he had some vert, and I was like, even if that's controlled environment, this guy's 97 with like 20 vert. Like, I think maybe even if he falls to like 18-ish, that's great. That average in Major League Baseball for an average release height's around like 16 inches or so, 15.8. So I was like, okay, I'm intrigued here because like you're telling me like velo with shape is not something you run into a lot. And then in the small sample I saw, I believe it was down in St. Lucie, like he was 20 vert at 98. Like that's pretty rare. Like you don't run into this a lot. And again, even if we assume some regression here as he jumps up and uses the Major League Baseball, like I like a Pete Fairbanks style comp here where it's probably more reliever. We'll see if he starts, they'll push him, et cetera, et cetera. That's not my purview to judge what they want to do workload wise and stuff. But it's a really good fastball. Like this thing is nasty. The one thing I did notice, and I haven't texted Mike about this, is that in the small amount of data I saw, to me, I thought he was tipping his slider because like a lot of the time you'll see small release differentials, and a lot of the time I don't think that really matters. But like Lambert was dropping and moving out horizontally like a good amount. Like if you look at a release point plot, like the pitches are separate between the slider and the fastball. So in the same vein of like a Jonah Tong's not tipping, but in the same vein, like if they're playing with a splinker and some other things, there's gonna be another pitch shape here in this mix that gets him to being relevant, you know? With the fastball alone, like I like him as a reliever. Like maybe I'll say I project him as a reliever just because 98 with that vert is really strong. So I'm very intrigued by him. He might be like a high rise late. Occasionally we run into like fun relief prospects like a Ben Joyce, but I remember like Ken Giles back in the day with the Phillies was a great relief prospect. There's usually a few of these guys where it's like, nah, he's a reliever, but like it's so good that we might make him like a top 150, top 100 guy.
Yeah.
And I wonder whether Lambert has like an outside shot of that. I think that'd be a really good outcome for him.
Totally. And he was a closer at Oklahoma, and we talked to him. He relished in the closer role. He loved being like he told us that he liked to
great anecdote.
become zen and get into the game and just have like pure serenity and just strike hitters out. He's like he really liked that vibe.
Fire me up, closer on him. Then. I don't even want him to start. Just close. There you go.
But another guy I liked in this draft, probably one of my favorite picks the Mets made, was Nate Dohm out of Mississippi State. Partially because the Mets every single year find a way to take a Mississippi State Bulldog. It's happened 6 times in 7 years, which is ridiculous. But he had a fastball go up to 99 miles an hour. He had the 4th highest strikeout to walk ratio in Division I, but he got hurt. He missed a lot of the season. So is there anything that you know about Dohm, like about Dohm? Because he kind of fits this mold that we're talking about where you get someone who's a little bit down and then bring him up a little bit.
Yeah. Dohm was a guy that I know the Dodgers were on to some extent.
Love to hear that.
Which is always fantastic. So, and he was like, I remember texting someone in that Oregon just going like, could you miss that you wanted? I love asking that question to people who work on the draft because it's like, then you see like, oh, you got 5. He sends, so-and-so will send me 5 names and it's like 3 of them go to one team and he's like, yeah, screw that. They're using the same thing, from a model projection standpoint, whatever. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of I've had people say like the spawn of Andrew Friedman, like Andrew, the president of baseball ops with the Dodgers, like he's had these disciples just like trickle out throughout baseball. And I imagine there's some people in the Mets org from that tree. And the philosophy stayed the same. And I think a lot of teams are starting to target very similar things. Dom is like interesting because I just think he has like reasonable fastball traits. Like you're looking for above average extension, below average release, and then you're looking for some vert, and he's got that. He's sat 94, 85 mile per hour slider, 87 sat on the changeup, and 80 mile per hour curve. This is the data I had on him. For me, the big carrying trait here is just like it's an interesting fastball shape where it's like, okay, hold the shape, progress. It was 2 plane again, which is in this Met sphere. That seems like everything is a little more arm side with some vert. So I imagine they're going to expand the mix out, probably give him some bigger breaking ball, threw a lot of strikes, even though this most recent year, I thought some of his zone data was pretty good, even though I think he wasn't particularly strong from a walk standpoint, which is always a weird disconnect to me of like, okay, were you just like falling behind guys and giving yourself no shot? And then when you're competitive, you're actually able to zone it. So he's just got some like baseline traits that I think are good to work with. And it seems like the Mets are good at IDing that. So I don't have anything super hard there. I don't have like the specific stuff of like liking him as much as Santucci, but if the Dodgers were on him and some other teams were on him and like the fastball shape looks good, he's got a pair of breaking balls that are decent. Like, yeah, I'm totally fine with being happy with that pick. Yeah, 2 guys that you guys threw to me. I forgot his first name. I apologize. Lanthaner? I don't know what his first name is. Ethan Lanthaner. This dude's shapes were weird. Everything he threw just lifted. So if you look at like a pitch plot, I'm nerding out here, but like when you get drop on things, That's like curveballs, depth sliders, depth sweepers, etc. Everything in his pitch plot was like above 7 or 8 inches, and I was like very confused because I expected him to be almost like a low arm submariner where everything's coming up, so like it's impossible for like a Tyler Rogers to create depth because like he's throwing up, so like that makes a lot of sense. Everything's verti for him, so to speak. And Lantern had the same effect where it's like the cutter, he was up here, the sweeper was like 10 and 10. It was like really weird, and the fastball was kind of weird. And I was like, I don't understand why this guy can't create depth on anything he throws. And his throw, like you watch him throw, wasn't as wacky as I thought it would be. So I've been meaning to send a text to someone in the Mets org about this and just be like, what is going on there? Like, is there something about how his hand's working to the ball that's just causing him to get behind everything? But I'm cool with that. Like, I just like weird dudes like that. And I mean, I think I have him sitting. Yeah, so I had him 96 on the fastball, 92 on the cutter, sweeper change too. And everything, but again, everything was lifted. So like, I don't really know what that means from like a, how are you going to fare versus various handedness of hitter. But I'm intrigued. The fact that like, I see a lot of pitch plots and I look at this stuff for analyzing pitchers and like, I don't see a lot of that a ton. So I'm in. Like, I'm just curious. Like, he's a guy put on the radar and be like, let me see what he's doing. You know, like, is everything still really wacky with how he throws and how are the results? Small sample on him too, specifically, which I always run into on these lower level guys. So I can't like be super confident and, oh, he needs to do this versus lefties better, etc. But release characteristics seemed good, throwing hard and just weird shapes.
It's gonna be a real shame if somebody clips that clip of you right there and saying, "I just like weird dudes." It's gonna be real horrible. So if someone takes that out, puts that out of context.
That's gonna be, it's a brand killer, man. Yeah, come on.
But Mark, I don't have anything else for Lance. If you don't have anything else,
Yeah,
that was awesome.
Yeah. Pushing Substack and YouTube specifically. Yeah, Lance BROZ should pop up. Same lancebroz.substack.com. I do pitcher notes in season. I also do prospect lists in there if you want to pay a little money, throw me some cash. And YouTube stuff's fun. Definitely getting like pretty heady with a lot of my topics, but I've been trying to grow and be a little more generic. So hopefully I could appease the masses while also satisfying the people who want to talk about
keep the granular stuff. It's the best.
Niche? Okay,
it's so good.
I'll stay niche.
I love it. No,
make sure you guys check out Lance's stuff in the description. Go check out his YouTube channel. Lance, thanks again for joining us, and we'll catch you guys on the next episode. Peace out.
Peace out, guys.